Hello everybody, good morning and thank you for being here with us. My name is Laura Minkini. I'm the founder of AthenaDAO. We're the leading decentralized organization funding women's health R&D. And we are on day 5 or 6 of events of our pop-up in San Francisco this October. An activation to focus on women's health, longevity, and fertility. And with me, I have the founder of GlycanAge. I'm going to let her introduce herself to tell us more about her work and who she is. And I'm very excited that they're here with us to talk about women's longevity, aging, and all those interesting things that keep us healthy for a longer and healthier life. Nicolina, please introduce yourself and thank you for being here with us.
No, thank you for inviting me. I'm awfully tired, so let's see if my brain works. So everybody calls me Nina, so you can just call me Nina. I stumbled onto this space because of my parents. They're both scientists, and my father discovered this a clock to measure aging on a molecular level almost 15 years ago. So he told me when I was 19 that he can measure aging on a molecular level, and I told him, well, I certainly don't care because I'm telling everyone I'm 25. So but then for a time, this became an interest, and we started to see aging as something we can measure to do preventive health. Because if you're measuring decline of your system on more of a molecular, we all kind of have different times when we get ill and when we die, and this disparity is huge. So we're currently based in the UK, and when you look at life expectancy in different cities in the UK, it varies by 15 years based on where you live. So if you live in Richmond, you live 17 years longer than somebody who lives in Blackpool. So there's a really big difference on how long we're healthy and how long we live. And what accounts for this difference is this internal aging that we just haven't been able to measure before. So we're one of these first clocks that does it. We're very different to the other clocks in the market because we look at your glycobiology, and this is a way of in this case, measuring how your immune system is aging, or this accumulation of damage to your immune system throughout life that would then lead to risk of disease and risk of death. And we do this by looking at your glycobiology, and majority of you here have not heard of, or if you know about glycans, you confuse them with simple sugars, because glycans are sugars, but they're sugars that your body manufactures to give your molecules function. And the reason we have these sugars in our biology is to enable multi-cell life, or to enable our biology to communicate. So every process we have, since we've been multi-cell being, is mediated by glycans. So cell-to-cell communication happens through them. Conception is mediated by glycans. And I'll explain how that works, but your blood group, your blood type, is defined by glycans in your blood cells. And they're really important for immune communication and everything on the immune level. And what keeps you alive most of the time is your immune system. We're very vulnerable if we don't have one. So with conception, the reason we can allow a foreign entity to create new life is because glycans would disguise sperm from the woman's immune system. And that's why they enable them. But also, this is how cancer would disguise itself. Cancer would put on these healthy-looking glycans to evade your internal immune system. And when we look at it from an immune aging perspective, you would accumulate these glycans with time. Glycans that usually protect you, the pro-inflammatory glycans, the ones that will respond to a threat or kill a virus or a foreign entity, they start to accumulate gradually, and they start to damage you, and they lead to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmunity. And you lose these protective glycans, which would then repair this damage or help mediate the response so that it doesn't become too harmful. So that's a process we measure, and where it helps in preventive health is glycans have certain signatures. So cardiovascular disease looks different to diabetes or to autoimmunity. And these signatures can change up to 10 years earlier than a routine diagnostic test. So for example, with hypertension, there's a certain glycan pattern that changes 6 years before you clinically develop it, and it's 98% accuracy. So we have the accuracy of the marker is 98%. So 98% of the time we're correct in telling you that you're heading towards hypertension within 6 years. Or with rheumatoid arthritis, the accuracy is 92% of the time we're correct in telling you that you'll develop the disease with 10 years' time. So because there's this time window before you're ill, this gives us an opportunity for you to do interventions. And with cardio risk, we know that this would respond to physical activity. So we can tell somebody, for you, physical activity is really important because it's going to delay your health risk. Or if you have a diabetes signature, this is really connected to diet. So diet would be the number one thing you focus on before you get to an issue, and you can measure how well you're doing in avoiding that. So I think I've spoken too long.
No, I mean, you're very passionate about it, but one of the big things while we're doing the ADLabs pop-up is because when you tell women, oh, we're funding research that's potentially going to delay menopause or extend fertility, and it's like, okay, that's cool, but that's so long and so far away, it's an abstract notion. And the idea is that some of the, your product came from scientific research. So the things that we want to highlight is the idea of from lab to product, and obviously you're in a direct-to-consumer product, but that has scientific backing. So for context for people, can you tell us more about? I think your dad founded that organization that has the biggest library.
Yep.
Yes, can you tell us about that and how it came to you, the notion of getting GlycanAge started based on that research?
So it took about 17 years.
Yeah, for context, this, some of these things take a long time. I think OneSkin, when they were here last year, they said 6 years, yeah. The 17. So a lot of these products, they look so simple, but it took a while to get them there.
It depends on where the research is or where you're starting. So if you go from like when the clock was discovered to when it's gone on the market, that's 10 years, because we're on the market for about just under 5 years, and it was first discovered 15 years ago. It doesn't need to take this long. It really depends on how well you're funded, how quickly things are going on, who's funding it, because we were mainly grant funded for these 17 years. So we would compete every year on the public funding market to try and get grants to progress.
It was the
research.
European Union, right?
All European Union. So we've won about 40 million over 17 years to develop it. But of course, in a very slow way. And if you have small amounts of money for a long period of time, you can do a lot. Sometimes even more than when you have to move so quickly and you kind of make more mistakes in that way. So I'm glad it took us this long, because you really need to show that something works scientifically before you give it to people. And we have a lot of data to support what we do. Then you were asking on I think our story is very unique. You're not going to have, I think every scientific journey is also very unique, because you're kind of looking at the unknown and you don't know what you're going to find. But the main challenge was that nobody looked at this part of biology at scale before. So my father was in Johns Hopkins when we were young, so we were there for about 2-3 years, and then he moved back. We're from Croatia. He moved back to Croatia, and he had 3 kids before he was 25. And he said, "Okay, I want to do the same level of science we did at Johns Hopkins. I want to do in Croatia." So then it took him years and years, maybe also a decade or more, to start his own private research institute where he could actually do the level of science as Johns Hopkins. And in Croatia, we did this first large study of the human glycans. So the first 1,000 glycans ever analyzed were done in our lab. And then that became an obsession. Of course, we did genomics as well. It was a genomic lab and a glycomic lab. But glycomics was the new thing, because it changes how you work beyond genes. It kind of was this unexplored territory. And our lab so far did 85% of the whole human global glycan was analyzed in our lab in Croatia. And now we transfer the technology to Northwestern in the US and to other clinical labs. So there's more places in the world that's adopting this type of technology. But we were the first. And because we looked at this big scale of data, we discovered this marker for aging, or this marker for predicting cardio events. If that wasn't done, we wouldn't, in these small data sets, you won't be able to see it. And then we were curious, why is aging the biggest factor for all these diseases? We would study disease, but then if you didn't have the age of the patient, you couldn't really understand what was going on. And then we realized, oh, there's something generally happening with their health, or there's like a biological age that would influence disease in the future. And then that led through there. And then over the last decade, he was convincing me that this should be something commercial, or that we can commercialize it. I was like, no, I'm in the tech industry, I'm making a lot of money. But I'm very glad I switched to bio about 5 years ago, and it gives you a lot more purpose and satisfaction. It's kind of like, I said I stopped working for money. And then the friend asked me why. I said,
biotech is hard.
Biotech is really hard. That's why you have to love it. If you're in this for the money, don't go into biotech. That's it.
And it's, I mean, for context, women, technically GlycanAge is in longevity biotech, but when you look at the funding spectrum, well, what you call, I mean, you don't only do women's, but a lot, it really varies in who gets the lion's share of the capital, even in longevity. People in longevity are not so much interested, quote unquote, in direct-to-consumer products. It's all about the cellular reprogramming and things that are more, I consider, moonshots. But that has to do also with the fact that I guess people ask you a lot of this, and you do a lot of conferences in longevity and health optimization, and there is no consensus on aging, right? So you're one of the biological clocks that is out there. But yours looks at something very specific that you can measure, which is immune aging. Can you explain a little bit more for people in terms of how the longevity industry is looking, or the longevity field is looking at immune aging?
Sure, but you spoke about consumer, so I'll just explain why we did consumer. This is something that matters on an individual level. If we do a study and we find that a certain type of drug is beneficial, it's never for 100% of people. So we recently studied metformin, and even in diabetics, metformin only benefited 50% of people. So it's something that you as an individual want to have information on. And we've had this marker that aging is not a disease. We couldn't go into healthcare. Healthcare wouldn't know how to use it. So the only way we can give it to people was to consumer and to private doctors. So we actually use the consumer side to encourage them to share it with their doctor and to educate them and to eventually get it to the healthcare system. So it depends on what type of product you have. If we had a drug, then yes, of course, it wouldn't be a consumer company, but we have a biomarker that is relevant to an individual. So we want to make it as accessible as possible. And of course, we still do research on it. We majority use it for research purposes to see what drugs and different interventions work and don't work, or to predict health outcomes in different trials. But the main benefit is individual. So there's no consensus on what aging is, and I don't think aging will ever be one thing, and I think it'll be different things will be weighted differently to different individuals. We know that inflammation is one of the biggest killers. So if we look at the global disease burden, about 60% of it will be related to chronic inflammation and diseases related to that. So we know that at least it's relevant for 60% of
they call it
people.
It's inflammaging now, right? Yeah. It's like an important thing.
Yeah, and then you have these different theories of aging. One is that we have a program, and we'll be able to find a reprogramming therapy and reverse this whole aging system and live 300 years. Maybe.
Who here thinks we're going to live to 300 years? Okay, Irina.
Yeah, and we might do. I think that is very relevant to maximum lifespan.
But not in this life, though.
Well, you never know.
I mean, I think people in longevity now are into cryopreservation more because they realize they're not going to get into. I'm personally putting my dog into that, but I don't know who's going to take care of him when they figure the technology, because I'm not cryopreserving myself. But
yeah, I think it's good to have an open mind, and I would have a closed mind on a lot of things, and I come to San Francisco and somebody opens my mind. So it really depends. So different aging biomarkers and aging theories. So the two kind of prevalent theories is that we have a program. aging program, they will be able to reprogram and prolong lifespan. The other theory is that we do continual damage for our life, and this is particularly immune damage that eventually accumulates and then causes us to be ill and to die. So we fall into the damage theory. And of course, there's different ways you have to address these processes. If it's a program, ideally you have a therapy to reprogram, because programs are very hard to adjust with small lifestyle changes, and that's what we see in the clocks. They move a little bit, but there's very little movement with different interventions. It's really a couple of years, and a lot of times after the intervention, when you remeasure, you're going back to baseline. So you're not in the, and this is more related to epigenetics. In this space, we're not seeing a lot of intervention studies come out when you can radically change the clock, like 5, 10, 20 years onwards. We have these studies, so we know how to change your clock by 5, 10, even 20 years onwards. Of course, not everybody will see this shift, and it depends what's causing inflammation for you. We did a study on bariatric surgery, and the average reduction after weight loss was 10 years within 9 months, but one patient lost 30 years on the glycan clock. Or we did an estrogen study, and the average reduction is about 7 years after 3 to 6 months on estrogen. But there was a patient who lost 25 years on estrogen. So it's a clock that you can really modify when you find, and it's meaningful because it's inflammation that we know is directly involved in many disease mechanisms and is a risk for your mortality. So when we see it go down, we know that we are changing your future health outcomes. And we now even have some data to prove it, meaning if you change the clock, you change a health outcome. And I can go into that. That's a study that's just coming in now if you wanted to. So we know it's meaningful for your health outcome now. While with the program, we still have a lot of work to do to show that this will be meaningful for a health outcome.
So speaking of health outcomes, one of the big things that I know you're doing is trying to get more done research specifically to women's health. And you obviously have a big patient population or client population that is women. How does immune aging impact them differently when they're going through perimenopause and menopause?
So first, women's and men's immune systems are different. And I think we'll go into the study I spoke about, because that was on gender affirming therapy and going on the hormones of the opposite sex. So you can change your hormone profile by changing you can change your immune profile by changing your hormones. Okay. And women are heavily influenced by estrogen, or estrogen is a big influencer both for men and women, and it makes their immune system more anti-inflammatory throughout life. So we really see that if we compare men and women and their aging curves, women are very stable up until perimenopause to menopause, and that's when they have their first big aging event. And then they catch up with men, and they move in the same line as men. Men are linear. They just age in a straight line. So it's kind of, which is connected to hormones. And there's probably many reasons why biology chose that, but one of them is probably this reproductive span that is very relevant to women's health, because the majority of chronic disease in women happens post-menopause. There is some things which are more prevalent, like autoimmunity and hormonal imbalances before that point, but all these age-related diseases are very much related post-menopause in women's health.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that we don't talk enough about, if you're not in this space, that post-menopause, women get more heart disease, there's osteoporosis, neurological diseases like obviously Alzheimer's and dementia. Women are more prone to them also because of this. So what can women do when they are measuring their GlycanAge in terms of seeing? I know that you're working on a special project for this, but tell us more about what should women be looking for as they're getting older when they're measuring something like GlycanAge?
So it depends on how old you are, and we are doing a lot of research now on fertility. Mm-hmm. And inflammation is very related to fertility, but we don't have enough science to talk about it in a concrete way. What we do know is that these hormonal imbalances, which happen earlier in life, like PCOS and endometriosis, they would make you more pro-inflammatory. So if it's earlier in life and you're pre-perimenopause and menopause stage, if you have a high burden of inflammation, the three most common reasons for that is a hormonal imbalance, autoimmunity, and stress or mental health. So these would be the three main reasons why you would do it in younger age. And of course, to track general damage of lifestyle. But if you look at high impact, what will really move your clock in the wrong direction, these three things would do that. Then if you are more perimenopause, menopause age, and this can start much earlier, it can be 39, it can be 45. It's the point where your estrogen starts to drop naturally because of aging. There we see that measuring this is very relevant on when you're going into perimenopause or when in perimenopause your estrogen is dropping. So you have chronic inflammation that's created from a hormonal drop or a hormonal deficiency. Then the problem is we all have unique levels of hormones. And this reference range for a normal level of estrogen is between 65 and 365. So for you, 65 might be the normal. For me, maybe 300 is the normal. But when you measure it in your early 40s, early 50s, you have no idea what it was when you were young. So you get a result from your doctor that says normal, but maybe you went from 200 to 65 and you're feeling the impacts of losing that estrogen, but your doctor will tell you that your estrogen is normal. So what inflammation helps us do is find the normal for you. So when you go on estrogen, you can titrate the dose to what actually keeps your body in balance, or something called homeostasis.
Less inflamed.
Less inflamed.
Yeah.
So deciding when you need estrogen and how much estrogen you need from a practical perspective. And then there's a lot of stigma around estrogen because of some poor science that was done 20 years ago and that was publicized in the wrong way, where we promote it as if estrogen causes breast cancer, which is not true. Estrogen does not cause breast cancer. But same as the contraceptive pill and the synthetic progestogen, in some versions of hormone replacement, it's a progestogen that was a risk for breast cancer, which now we have different types and they don't come with the same risk. And even if we looked at that level of risk with the synthetic progestogens that we also have in the contraceptive pill, and there are a lot of us who are on the pill, that was 1.26 increased risk of breast cancer, but it didn't increase breast cancer mortality. And if you compare it to, like, for example, smoking and cancer, lung cancer risk, 27.6. So that from 1.6 to 27.6, smoking is an actual cancer risk. Estrogen is not. But what the media did 20 years ago, they went and they said estrogen causes breast cancer. And you had a whole generation of women and doctors stop estrogen.
Yeah, the WHI, right?
WHI, yes.
And so it was a big study. It was the first one of its kind. It was like $1 billion. It was the first time they spent a lot of money.
It was the first time they spent a lot of money on women's health. So this was the first failure of spending a lot of money in women's health. And they never done anything of the sort later on.
I think this story goes that they didn't have the final, but they sent some quotes to the media and they ran with like the wrong proof. And that's what like went to market.
I think it's also the first failure of the first longevity drug.
It was done also, yeah.
It was the first public failure of a longevity drug because the market wasn't ready for longevity drugs. Because if something's natural, menopause is a natural event, and you treat it with a drug, even if you have a tiny increase of a risk, you're treating something that technically you can avoid treating. So no level of risk is accepted. And I think that's why it publicly failed. But now there is data. So this is data from retrospective trials of the same trial, or new data from the UK Biobank that showed they looked at, from all the drugs which are today commonly prescribed, there was about 406 drugs. And majority of them decrease your lifespan. But they identified 40 drugs that prolong your lifespan. And of these, 4 were estrogens. So estrogen is a validated longevity drug, and majority of people will benefit from it, both in terms of it will prolong your health span, decrease diabetes, many other osteoporosis, many other conditions, but also the symptoms that come with menopause. So about 80 to 90% of women have symptoms of menopause. And these are paralyzing symptoms. It can be depression, insomnia, and everybody has them. And HRT completely takes away all these symptoms. As long as it's personalized to you at the right time, at the right dose, all these 90-80% of nuisance symptoms go away. But only 7% of women in the US are on HRT and 14% of women in the UK. So 90% of women have symptoms, only 7 to 40% are actually getting help and fixing those symptoms. So they spend a lot of out-of-pocket cash on top of their insurance, about $20,000 over 10 years, to manage these symptoms, from insomnia to depression to joint pains to heart palpitations to mood changes. That's a huge amount of money that we're wasting out of our own pockets, beyond our insurance, what our insurance pays for, to manage menopause. And there is a simple, effective solution that just needs to be personalized, and we need to be less scared of it. Because even if we look at small risk, contraceptive pill carries the same risk, and there's 27% of women on the, or 26% of women on the contraceptive pill. There's only 7 to 14% of women on HRT. And I think the reason for it is also the age stigma and the menopause stigma that now is changing a little bit in the public side.
Well, what we need is options, because even I think the Gen Z generation, they prefer not to take the pill. There's now, a lot of money being invested into non-hormonal contraceptives. And for women, obviously HRT is the only solution right now. We should have more solutions than that. But it's great. It's being very stigmatized. And I think women also don't. Gen X now in this new generation is more open to talk about it. But if you go ask your mother and your grandmother, menopause is not something that was like a combo that was being had out there. Because there's a notion of your fertility declining and women can take it. You still go to a doctor, and if you have something, it's like, it's okay, you're a woman, or it's just your hormones, and it's just like the blanket statement each and every time of how to, quote unquote, treat or recognize pain or health problems with women. Even cardiovascular disease, it's ignored a lot in women because they consider it as a problem for men. And there's a huge incidence of cardiovascular disease not being diagnosed on time on women, because the pain is considered, it's just your
It's different
health.
Symptoms with cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, they don't have this. It's not the same.
And I can tell you how we see it, but I want to add something on the contraceptive pill. The contraceptive pill is not something. If there's other ways to prevent pregnancies, it's not something you need, because you're giving yourself hormones you don't need. To try and mimic as if the body is already pregnant. So the dose of hormones is far higher than in menopause, and they're usually synthetic hormones. Compared to, we have body identical hormones for menopause, and they're a lot lower than HRT. And it's basically just preserving balance in the body, giving it back something it's used to having. Contraceptive pill is meddling with your hormones, so it's very different. So I think the comparison is never ideal, but it's kind of, I try to use it to say how afraid of hormones we are in one case, and the other case we're not, and they're completely different.
I think now younger generations are afraid. They're more vocal about, I don't want to put. So it's interesting because we're going even more in, I think post-COVID, people are a little bit more mindful about, pharma, chemicals.
Oh yeah, I think we made a lot of mistakes in COVID with how we kind of portray science, and that lost a lot of public trust. Cardiovascular disease. We're the first marker that sees biological differences, gender differences in the biomarker. So men have a completely different glycan pattern to women. And that hasn't been done before because, first of all, we don't study women enough, or we don't study these gender influences enough, or hormonal influences. And because of that, women have a 50% increased risk of mortality from a cardio event. And the reason for it is their symptoms are different. They're missed. There's not biomarkers customized to them. And that starts with not having science to customize biomarkers and to acknowledge gender differences in some diseases.
For context, I love to give this data points. I didn't know this until 4 years ago, but the NIH only spends 10% of their budget in female-specific conditions. So that means that anything like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, anything that could be female specific, it's not spent on, it's 10%. Then from that, 1% goes into fertility because there's this whole notion that fertility is overfunded. It is not. Of that, 0.003 goes into ovarian aging, which ovarian aging is the thing that touches menopause. All women are going to have menopause, so it's crazy to me that we're not researching it that much more. And the whole notion that biopharma wants to have us taking pills and making sure that we are medicalized is also wrong, because it went up this year, but the total R&D spend in biopharma in female-specific condition is 2% or 3%, and of the lion's share of that is in oncology and like breast cancer. Everything else, endometriosis, PCOS, menopause, no diets. So when you say, oh, we don't study it in women, well, I mean, everybody here, I'm sure, has heard of Brian Johnson, right? Yes, no? Well, yes, probably, or no, but he's becoming very well known in quote-unquote longevity, but all his protocols and everything he's doing is for men. So I'm not saying that women should do the protocol that he's doing, because there's a lot to say there, but
his protocol is only for him.
Yeah, it's only for him.
And we don't actually know if it works. So
yeah, but for the record, the clock is measuring is not even, it's one of the clocks, so it's not the final one. So he could be not actually even reversing anything.
Well, I think it's complex, and we can't use one individual to do science. It's nice that he wants to experiment on himself. I think that's definitely positive, but it should also be taken very cautiously when it influences people to do the same. It needs to be acknowledged that it's self-experimentation, and what we really need is good research to prove things out, and that's why what you're doing is so important, because nobody's doing that at the moment. It's such a huge funding gap, and women haven't been included in trials. I think in 1996 we started to include women. Even in animal studies, it wasn't mandatory until maybe a decade ago or something like that.
30 years ago, I think it's been now.
For mice?
Yeah, female species, yeah.
Okay, then I got that wrong.
It was women in diverse populations. So it wasn't it was a focus on women. It was little, but and women are usually considered. So I come from I say this also, I come from the fashion luxury industry, not a scientist. But to me, it's shocking how the life sciences has ignored women for so long, because the richest man on earth, back and forth, Bernard Arnault, he made money from selling products to women. What is luxury? Who are the biggest consumer of beauty and fashion? Women. When he bought his first company, it was in the 1980s. It was a company that sold dresses for women. He did not have to be a woman wearing a dress to get it. That's, I say the man is smart. But in the life sciences, we're just not doing it for some reason, because the decision makers are usually men that do not have that foresight. Women make 80% of the healthcare decisions at home, so they're also picking the products. And women are 80% plus of the consumer spending in the US, which is the biggest consumer spending in the world. Imagine how much they would be making business-wise if we had diagnostics for endometriosis, if we had more solutions for menopause, if we had all these things that cater to our needs specifically. And yet we are, we had a book launch this weekend with the vagina business. I know, big name, but she has a quote in there where she says, if the automotive industry moved at the speed that we're moving in women's health, we would still be in a wagon cart with our bonnets. That's where we are in the life sciences for women's health. So in the age of AGI, and here in San Francisco, AI this, AI for drug discovery. What drugs are you going to discover if we don't have the data? The algorithm can't algorithm without not knowing all of this information. Just contextualizing how some things are here and some things are down here.
Yeah, I think that's the problem of who makes the decision, and being aware and seeing that market opportunity, and that's very hard because you need to educate investors or whoever provides the grants, and unfortunately all of that is very biased and takes a very long time to do the education. But the commercial opportunity is definitely there, they're just missing it. So whoever sees it, that is going to be a big win. but it's an uphill battle until we prove this out.
It's okay, it's gonna get there. Any questions? Because I could keep, okay, over there.
I have a question about GlycanAge and mitochondrial health and how they relate to one another.
We never studied it, so we actually don't know, but we would love to study it. So if you know of any scientists who work in the space, who have some samples they can send us, we would love to do some studies.
Right. So, because there's other aging products out there that are looking at mitochondrial signatures to map age, and so we don't know of a relationship between glycans and mitochondria for predicting age. Is that what you're saying?
We don't. So I haven't seen any good validated clocks looking at mitochondrial health, and that takes a very long time to develop. So they will really need to do large population studies correlated to health outcomes, test different interventions. But we know that mitochondrial health is very important to the aging process, and there are some molecules that influences which are already on the market. So technically, as a consumer, I wouldn't buy a mitochondrial clock, but I would measure function of it and test it alongside a supplement I'm taking for that purpose. So for that purpose, I think that's worth the experiment, and it is quite relevant to women's health from the early trials there. So I would personally, I've tried some supplements on that side.
I used to work for one.
Yeah, okay, cool, yeah. It's a very exciting space, yeah. More needs to be done.
And how does your product compare to something like Nightingale Health, which has another?
Oh, so they actually have a glycan marker, or this acute inflammatory marker called GlycanAge. It's not the chronic systemic aging-related inflammation we measure, but it's quite relevant to cardio, and it's a very interesting glycan marker. So they have one glycan marker that we highly support. They're generally, looking at different side of biology, and I think, and they did great work with the UK Biobank. They analyzed the whole UK Biobank to look at their markers. So I would look at that as something additional you can measure. I think their science is really good. They haven't been very, commercially, they've been very understated marketing-wise. So I think what they're doing is quite good, and I highly support it, but very different to what we measure, and we never compared it. So I can't tell you how it compares, but I know that the glycan marker they compare doesn't relate to our marker because it's not aging related, but it is a potentially better way to measure acute inflammation like CRP. So that could replace the CRP inflammatory marker one day.
Go ahead.
Could you clarify the difference between biological age and epigenetic age? And I have one more question.
Yeah.
The second question is, what does glycans tell us about the formation of cancer as opposed to looking at DNA?
Okay, so two complex questions. Remind me of the second one because I'll tackle the first one. Actually, I haven't slept for 2 days, so you need to remind me of the first one now.
It's epigenetic age versus biological age.
Biological age is a concept. Okay, let's start there. Biological age is something we invented to simplify different markers. But I don't think there will ever be one biological age. And I think it's important to understand what does the marker actually measure, in which case, in our case, it's immune function and immune aging. You can put a clock on anything. You can step on a scale and they'll give you an age based on your physiology. You can look at your lungs and your lung capacity compared to the average lung capacity in the population and give yourself a lung age. Where these molecular aging clocks are important because you want to measure systemic aging as precisely as you can. And if we look at systemic aging, which is not relevant to just one system or skin, lung, muscle or something else, glycans and epigenetics come on top. So proteomics, lipidomics, very risk specific. Glycans and epigenetic are very systemic. They're very general aging in the body. Epigenetics is a layer on top of our genes. So you're looking at a big pool of information that doesn't have direct mechanistic function. So you can create a glycan epigenetic clock. Like they can try and proxy our clock by looking at the epigenome. You can model a lot of things on epigenetics because it's such a rich data set. So Steve Horvath, who did most of the work in this space has 50 different clocks. I don't know the exact number, and they're intended for different things. One is intended to predict mortality, the GlycanAge. One is intended to predict maximum lifespan. One is intended to predict disease, the PhenoAge. And what was interesting, when he compared these clocks, they didn't correlate with each other. So his epigenetic clock to predict maximum lifespan didn't correlate with his clock to predict mortality or to predict disease. So I think what that tells us is that maybe there's a program, maybe there's a maximum lifespan, but actually other things kill us along the way, and they're different. So when we compare performance of these epigenetic or glycan clocks, the GlycanAge as it is equally good at predicting mortality as Steve's GlycanAge. And we're better at predicting disease than some of these scientific clocks in different papers. And we're better, like if you have an acceleration in their clock, this is more predictive of future hospitalization within a 10-year time frame than any of the other clocks which are on the market at the moment. But epigenetics is very interesting. Commercially, it's problematic because these clocks are measuring different things, and just saying you have an epigenetic clock doesn't give you anything. You have to say, what does your epigenetic clock actually measure? What is it modeled on? Is it disease? Is it mortality? Is it aging of a certain system? And then kind of work from there. So, and we don't mechanistically understand what drives them. So that's the big scientific piece of work we need to do to make them useful. With inflammation, or inflammation clocks, we know exactly what it is and how it kind of relates to health outcomes and interventions. So it's a little bit more mechanistically transparent. Well, I think epigenetics are really exciting. Even Steve Horvath says that you should spare your money on a lot of the clocks. But then, of course, we're also biased. So, if you're into this space, do whatever you like, try whatever you like. So.
Just, I guess, for context, biological age is the blanket thing that you call measuring your age. It can be either epigenetic or glycan. I mean, obviously, like inflammation or anything else, but GlycanAge is also a biological age test. So, it's just different. It's just a, what do you call it? A vertical, and then in that
it's like saying fruit. This is fruit, but
there's
many different types of fruit.
There's apple, there's banana. So one is what you call the vertical, and the other one is one of the measures of that. Yeah.
But maybe I'll explain what a longevity clinic is, or what the longevity health space is, because right now we measure things in the context of disease. And either you have it or you don't have it. And we can only treat it when we can identify a problem in the context of disease. What these aging markers do, they try to reference things in the context of age. So what should your lung capacity be in the context of age? You're 30, but it's 40. Can we bring it down to 20? So when we do longevity healthcare, you get out of the concept of disease. You're a healthy person. And you're trying to optimize your markers to the best or the youngest ages to give you the maximum health and function and life extension. So that's what Brian Johnson is doing and trying to do, but we need a lot more than one person, and also we need some gender diversity in there. But that's the concept of it. That's why it was invented.
Prevention.
Optimizing for the young function, as young as you can. Like we've been obsessed about skin and trying to make our skin look as young as possible. Now we're getting as obsessed about our internal bodies. And I think that's a positive step. I think that goes beyond the superficial, which.
And then you had a question about cardiovascular, which I forgot as well.
I know you said it was a very broad question, but what does glycans tell us about
cancer, yes.
Cancer,
okay.
Sorry, cancer.
versus looking at DNA as a biomarker?
Again, apples and oranges, so they're very, very tough, but I can tell you how glycans are relevant. So of course, this inflammatory load is a risk factor for different cancers. And different cancers will be weighted differently. Like we have a lot of work on colon cancer and lung cancer. So there, this systemic inflammation would be quite relevant. But also different glycan markers, I think with cancer, if you're looking general inflammation, it's going to be quite hard to be specific. And I think the reason why it can be specific with colon cancer is because it's so related to IBD, where that's one of the risk factors for colon cancer. So we're kind of actually seeing progression, different stages of the same disease, which is fueled by inflammation and this systemic gut-related inflammation. Where cancer and glycans are a very good space for research, or where we have some new therapeutics. There was a Nobel Prize in glycobology last year. Carolyn Bertozzi used click chemistry to look at glycans and self-surface because the cancer cells would disguise themselves from my immune system by coating themselves with these healthy-looking glycans. So she has a really nice analogy where she says the glycans put makeup on. So it's like Michelle Pfeiffer without makeup. It looks very different. So it evades our immune system. And she designed this therapy, which is in like phase 2 now in trials, to cut these healthy glycans off cancer so the immune system can see it and kill it. So that's where I think the cancer space in glycans will be very interesting. But I don't think that, for example, our marker will catch all cancers. I think definitely some rare cancers would probably be missed, or some, like we did this trial with predicting hospitalization outcomes, and we were relevant to many cancers, from skin cancers but the genital cancers we missed because they were highly localized. So of course, maybe there'll be a different glycan marker to catch them, maybe from menstrual blood or something like that, or some other more female-specific marker. But we missed the early stage genital cancers. So I wouldn't say that's But we might catch information that makes you predisposed to catching a virus and then getting the cancer.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You were starting to paint the picture of how glycan testing is different from like epigenetic testing for aging, and how it might be more conducive to interventions, to measuring interventions. Can you tell us a little bit more about like what interventions your test can kind of like point towards today, and maybe your vision for how glycan testing would be part of like standard of care in the future, and how consumers and physicians should start thinking about it?
So I think glycan testing will come into the space where genetics started, where you can identify specific risk factors in an individual, but early. And the only difference is that they are modifiable with intervention. So instead of you saying you inherently have a risk, it's kind of like you're 10 years away from this risk, and these are the interventions that would work. So we already know that the diabetic glycan markers respond to diet, caloric restriction, or the cardio markers respond to exercise. So that's how a clinician can use it in a preventive, because if you're seeing a regular doctor and you tell him, hey, I have a predisposition to hypertension in 5 years, he'll be like, yeah, okay, I'll see you in 5 years. I'll give you the drug you need, but he's not going to help you along that path. So it has to be a doctor who is preventive. Interventions that work, we started with the general interventions that everybody would believe are the pillars of health, like diet and exercise. And I think that what we found there is, yes, of course, different types of diets and exercise, like caloric restriction generally lowers your age. Weight loss, significant weight loss. Bariatric surgery, weight loss drugs, does lower your GlycanAge. Not in everyone, but generally that is overall, if you're overweight, that's a beneficial reduction of your clock. Exercise is interesting. Moderate exercise gives us the youngest profiles, and moderate exercise is very effective. But over-exercise makes you more pro-inflammatory. And actually, athletes had the same burden of chronic inflammation as overweight and sedentary people. So it's, of course, you look a lot better, but internally you're equally inflamed as if you were unhealthy. And I think the reason for that is you're not striving for longevity or health, you're striving for performance. So you're inherently doing damage, and you want to be doing damage because you want to push your body to a maximum. So what we do with athletes, you're trying to measure recovery and optimize that recovery. So after you do damage, you go back to your healthy baseline versus accumulate some of that throughout time. But as an athlete, you will be chronically inflamed. Then we tested some drugs, and the best performing overall drug is estrogen. Metformin also has an effect in a subset of population. So in healthy people, it's 5 to 10% who would respond to it in an anti-inflammatory way. So I think majority of people who take it for longevity don't get the benefits from it because it doesn't have many negative side effects. It's a very safe drug, but it will lower your testosterone. It will hinder muscle gains when you exercise. It can cause gut disturbances. So I think a lot of people who take it for longevity might be doing harm versus benefit. Estrogen is the winner, so that's the one we're applying to the X-Pipe to titrate the dose. And it's relevant to men and women. And it's, of course, very depending on timing dose, not too much, not too little, and optimal balance with other hormones. But testosterone converts to estrogen. And we see that the beneficial effect of having a healthy level of testosterone in men is through estrogen in terms of inflammation. So when we run trials and we knock down testosterone in men and then give it back, the only time it's beneficial is if it's allowed to convert to estrogen. If you block estrogen conversion, it's pro-inflammatory. So testosterone would increase your age, but if you allow it to convert, so this is the example of taking steroids as a bodybuilder. You'll usually take it with aromatase blocker, so you get the negative side of it, but not the benefit. But taking testosterone when it's dropped, when you're aging, and kind of getting back to your healthy baseline, that is good. And that's what we're studying now in a broad scope, because I think a lot of people, same as women are afraid of estrogen, men are afraid of testosterone. And we have less, like the sperm count has gone down over the last 50 years, and testosterone levels are going down because of God knows what, stress, toxins, we don't know. So this is becoming a big problem in men that's, there wasn't a problem before, but now it's affecting much younger men, and it's hard to tackle because we don't, again, have the good markers to identify when, what dose, what type, and so forth. Estrogen, like raw estrogen, gender-affirming therapy. We had a study of HIV patients, that's just coming on now, and that's where we proved that if you change the biomarker, so you lower inflammation in the patient, you change a health outcome, and the health outcome that improved was less coronary plaque, so less cardiovascular disease. It was gender-affirming therapy for people born as male who go onto estrogen. They want all the side effects of estrogen. And they were all HIV positive, but in this case, their inflammation was as if they were actually healthy. And they were on the HIV drugs, so of course, HIV drugs accelerate aging, so they're mitigating some of the damage of the drug, and they had better outcomes in the long run, less cardiovascular disease. So there is a version of estrogen run in animal trials now that doesn't feminize. It's the alpha-17 estradiol. So in men, it doesn't cause the side effects of feminization, but in mice, it prolonged lifespan as much as rapamycin. So I think that's the very interesting, only relevant to men, but the male drug that we need to study for longevity that could be as effective as estrogen.
If you want to biohack on yourself too.
Yeah, there's also some therapies. So we did a recent study on the plasma pheresis. That was Dobry Kiprov. He started in the stem cell space. He's a very senior scientist. That reduced the clock about 3 years after 6 months. So this plasma pheresis that people are doing for longevity now seems to benefit a little bit. Well,
rapamycin for women is the one that has the most research, and well, not the most research, but that recent clinical trial with Columbia University that...
It was in humans? In women? Yeah. Okay.
Yusin Su.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
She's been giving rapamycin to women who were not successful on IVF treatments. And there's some positive data coming back from it. But again, these are there are women out there using rapamycin for trying to reverse
we need to ask her for some samples.
Menopause, but there is an actual human clinical trial where they're giving rapamycin to women who have tried to do IVF, were not successful, and with rapamycin being able to do ovarian, I would guess, rejuvenation or...
Yeah, I think we need to ask her for samples and do the trial. We did the Pearl trial with rapamycin, and we're just calibrating the data with everything else. But I think I could talk about it. It's going to be published now, but we didn't see much effect. And I think the problem there was the type of rapamycin they use. It was this compounding, so they even know that it wasn't very bioactive. So I think it might not be relevant so much to rapamycin as much as So, but still, at least in that dose and that compound, it was safe.
Just for context, rapamycin is a drug that people into longevity are talking a lot about, and it's a repurposed drug because it's actually used for when you do heart transplants. It's an immunosuppressant, or like not heart transplants, but transplants. So it's interesting, but also because it cannot be patented or sold as its own new drug, they don't really, there's no interest in really doing that many huge clinical trials because you could literally buy it.
I would be very cautious about taking it off label. I think if it works.
I'm not telling, I'm just giving context. I'm not recommending anybody go and get it. Just now there are services in the US that you can get a doctor to prescribe it to you, but it's at your own accord that you take it.
It's an immunosuppressant, so if you're taking it for organ transplants, there's a known cancer risk on that dose for organ transplants. Of course, in the longevity dose, maybe the cancer risk is not there, but nobody can guarantee you that because the trials run for a couple of years and it could give you a risk in 10 years' time. It could make you more predisposed to catching a virus cold. There is some little data on that, but I would really heavily discourage self-experimentation until there is actual human.
I wasn't suggesting anybody do this, but are there any more questions? 2 more questions quickly. Go ahead, and then you. Go ahead.
So in terms of hormones, there was also some, I guess people were talking about not eating chicken or tofu because of estrogen.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, if estrogen is good, then what does that mean for those studies and foods that are...
So that's the challenge. Estrogen on its own is not an anti-inflammatory drug. Like you can't give it to an autoimmune patient and knock down their inflammation. There is, like for example, in rheumatoid arthritis, when women are pregnant, they have this very special type of estrogen that you only get in that stage of life that removes your rheumatoid, so they don't have symptoms. Rheumatoid goes into remission naturally. But any other context, there's no evidence to say that it's a straight out anti-inflammatory. Why it works anti-inflammatory is because hormones keep your body in an optimal balance. So if you're losing them because of aging and putting them back, you're putting your body back into balance. And that's what you want, that's when it's beneficial. But if you're young and you already have a good level of estrogen and then you're getting excess levels of estrogen because of hormones in poultry or different like toxin triggers, then that is probably bad. Like we don't need more estrogen when you're young, we need it when we're losing it. We need to repair balance. And then there's also many different types of estrogen. There's estrogen which is created by your reproductive organs, and there's estrogen which is created by fat. And the estrogen which is created by fat is generally pro-inflammatory. So it's not a simple conversation of is estrogen good or bad. It's about what type, at what context, yeah.
So correct me if I remember wrong, my sleep has been terrible as well. You said earlier in your adulthood, you didn't really care about longevity, even like your parents are doing it, and you kind of picked that up later on. And then just when we were talking about prevention, I think we really want to push this agenda narrative to the younger population, and then where most of their habits and worldview is formed. What are your takes or some of the methods and ways and opportunities you're seeing to educate the young audience, college, high school, especially given this like live fast, die young current trend, how can we let this trend pick up?
So So my parents are not longevity scientists. My father stumbled onto this by accident. He doesn't care about his personal longevity. Actually, he's really bad. He's like a die-hard. So he's like that walking contradiction. The unhealthy scientist who's obsessed about it. Oh yeah, he loves cookies. So
I know, not a longevity breakfast.
and we know how bad he's doing. We predicted his hypertension. We predicted his diabetes and his rheumatoid. Like it's just you knowing about that you're doing damage to yourself doesn't necessarily change the behavior. So I think the complexity there is actually mental health, and and also that fuels bad habits. So I think it's relevant to anybody above 20, because your immune system is a bit chaotic, and as you're growing, it becomes like, I wouldn't measure it beyond 20. And maybe even 25 is fine, but then we've had some 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds who, because of smoking and bad lifestyle, were already 10 years above what they should have been. So it kind of depends on when when you're doing damage, and if you recognize you're doing damage. Ideally, your parents give you this, or a friend recommends it. And then you can tell at the beginning when you started to do damage and change behavior. So maybe I can tell you about my kind of experimentation on that. And I think aging is a good thing. I like to be older every year. So that's why, and I always wanted to be older than I was, I think, because I started businesses when I was 18. So people didn't take me seriously. Okay. So I think in terms of age, I was happy with the aging. But health-wise, of course I cared about health. Like, nobody likes to feel fatigue. And I think at 24, I felt worse than I feel now. Although now also I measured the damage I do. And it was all related to stress that was fueled by trying to overachieve something that came from childhood trauma. And caused me a great deal of pain. Up until now, it still causes me some pain. So I think that's the crisis in the young. And that's the thing that you can change by telling them to stop smoking, stop drinking, stop destroying yourself. You have to kind of tackle where did this problem begin and give them tools, how to manage that. And the tool that helped me was meditation. So I had, in one of my first successful companies, I had a complete burnout. It was only me and a small team, and we were making a bunch of money, but I didn't have a minute free. I didn't eat, sleep. It was really horrible. And then I signed myself up for this meditation retreat, you follow sensations in the body and try to change your response to them. And I came back, my environment was the same, nothing changed, but stress just slid off of me. So I can sleep, I started eating normally, my glycan markers improved, and it kind of permanently just shifted my perspective. So I think if I didn't experience that at 24 and fix that problem, I would have had some kind of autoimmune and severe health condition by now.
I think in America, a big issue is the food. You arrive and you gain weight from just breathing. It's a really big issue that has to be fixed here. Really big, comparable to the European Union. It is true that actually regulation does work a little bit, because the food here, there's a lot of advocacy to do in how much sugar, the oils, everything else. And I would say for women is knowing about their fertility journey. It's something that they don't prepare us for, and it's like a big thing for our health. Not only if you want to have kids, even if you don't want to. And working out is the one thing. You said live fast. What did you say, the young generations? They're the opposite of that. They don't go out, so they're not socializing. They're not dating. They're not having sex. They're on their screens. They're doing the opposite of live fast. It's very slow burn on screens. And I think that's going to be a huge problem in the next 20 years, where younger generations are not socializing, are not being good to their mental health, and not meeting. It's very good to actually be in front of somebody talking, not just on your screen. So getting off the screens is going to be a big thing, I think, in the next little while, that I would be like, go touch grass. You know, what is that big thing that we do online? Touching grass.
Yeah, I think these are super complex problems, but you can eliminate some of the obvious ones. And I think the biggest shock I have is if I turn on US TV for a minute, or I hear the radio, and then they're promoting junk food, and then the drugs that fix the symptoms of junk food.
Yeah.
So I think it's just like, so the corporate, the over-capitalism, the capitalism at all extents, you know, it doesn't matter if it harms their end customer, is
The flywheel.
big problem. Yeah.
Create a forever consumer of one or the other.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Nicolina is still going to be here for a little bit if you have more questions. We have a surprise for everybody that's here. So we're announcing the winner if somebody gets to get their GlycanAge tested today with Nicolina. And her name is Maya Sarin. Maya, yay! So you're here. If there's any other questions for here, please make sure you also get one of the gift bags, the white ones. Those are for everybody to take. You can also check out the GlycanAge website, and if you want to find out more, Nicolina can help you today. And here's your little swag bag. Thank you so much.
I heard I get some OneSkin.
Yes, we have 3 or 4 more events, so make sure to check out our website, and hopefully we'll see you at the next ones. And thank you for being here this morning.